Mrs. Warren's Profession. Mrs. Warren's Profession is a play written by George Bernard Shaw in 1893 and first performed in London in 1902. The play is about a former prostitute, now a Madam Brothel proprietor, who attempts to come to terms with her disapproving daughter. It is a problem play, offering social commentary to illustrate Shaw's belief that the act of prostitution was not caused by moral failure but by economic necessity. Elements of the play were borrowed from Shaw's 1882 novel Cashel, Byron's Profession, about a man who becomes a boxer due to limited employment opportunities. Summary. The story centers on the relationship between Mrs. Kitty Warren and her daughter Vivi. Mrs. Warren, a former prostitute and current brothel owner, is described as, on the whole, a genial and fairly presentable old blackguard of a woman. Vivi, an intelligent and pragmatic young woman who has just graduated from university, has come home to get acquainted with her mother for the first time in her life. The play focuses on how their relationship changes when Vivi learns what her mother does for a living. It explains why Mrs. Warren became a prostitute, condemns the hypocrisies relating to prostitution, and criticizes the limited employment opportunities available for women in Victorian Britain. Plot. Vivi Warren, a thoroughly modern young woman, has just graduated from the University of Cambridge with honors in mathematics equal third wrangler, and is available for suitors. Her mother, Mrs. Warren, her name changed to hide her identity and give the impression that she is married, arranges for her to meet her friend Mr. Preed, a middle-aged, handsome architect, at the home where Vivi is staying. Mrs. Warren arrives with her business partner, Sir George Crofts, who is attracted to Vivi despite their 25-year age difference. Vivi is romantically involved with the youthful Frank Gardner, who sees her as his meal ticket. His father, the married Reverend Samuel Gardner, has a history with Vivi's mother. As we discover later, he may be Vivi's out-of-wedlock father, which would make Vivi and Frank half-siblings. Mrs. Warren successfully justifies to her daughter how she chose her particular profession in order to support her daughter and give her the opportunities she never had. She saved enough money to buy into the business with her sister, and she now owns with Sir George a chain of brothels across Europe. Vivi is, at first, horrified by the revelation, but then lauds her mother as a champion. However, reconciliation ends when Vivi finds out that her mother continues to run the business even though she no longer needs to. Vivi takes an office job in the city and dumps Frank, vowing she will never marry. She disowns her mother, and Mrs. Warren is left heartbroken, having looked forward to growing old with her daughter. Origins. Shaw said he wrote the play to draw attention to the truth that prostitution is caused not by female depravity and male licentiousness, but simply by underpaying, undervaluing, and overworking women so shamefully that the poorest of them are forced to resort to prostitution to keep body and soul together. He explained the source of the play in a letter to the Daily Chronicle on 28 April 1898. Miss Janet, a church and actress and friend of Shaw's, mentioned to me a novel by some French writer, Yvette, by Guy de Maupassant, as having a dramatizable story in it. It being hopeless to get me to read anything, she told me the story. In the following autumn I was the guest of a Lady Beatrice Webb of very distinguished ability, one whose knowledge of English social types is as remarkable as her command of industrial and political questions. She suggested that I should put on the stage a real modern lady of the governing class, not the sort of thing that theatrical and critical authorities imagine such a lady to be. I did so, and the result was Miss Vivi Warren. Mrs. Warren herself was my version of the heroine of the romance narrated by Miss Church. The tremendously effective scene, which a baby could write if its sight were normal, in which she justifies herself. Performance history. The play was originally banned by the Lord Chamberlain, Britain's official theatre censor, because of its frank discussion of prostitution, but was finally performed on Sunday, 5 January 1902, at London's New Lyric Club, with the distinguished actor-manager Harley Granville Barker as Frank, Fanny Bra as Mrs. Warren, George Goodhart as Sir George Crofts, Julius Knight as Preed, Madge McIntosh as Vivie, and Cosmo Stewart as the Reverend Samuel Gardner. Members-only clubs had been a device to avoid the eye of authority, but actors often also used the opportunity to invite their fellow artists to a private showing of a play, usually on Sundays when theatres were closed to the public. The first public performance in London took place in 1925. 1905 performance in New York, this time on a public stage, was interrupted by the police, who arrested the cast and crew for violating New York City's version of the Comstock laws. It was later held not to be in violation of the law, and has been revived on Broadway 5 times since. In December 1918, the play was produced in Perth, Australia by the actor-manager Alan Wilkie, and featured a friend and protégé of Shaw, Fred Eswide Hunter Watts, as Vivie Warren. The play has been twice revived by the National Theatre, first in 1970-71 at the Old Vic, directed by Ronald Eyre, with Carl Brown and Sarah Badel, and more recently at the Littleton Theatre in 1985-86, directed by Anthony Page, with Joan Plowright and Jessica Turner as Mrs. Warren and Vivie. The Shaw Festival at Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, has mounted the play 5 times since the festival's inception in 1962, 1976, 1990, 1997, 2008, and 2016. In 2006, it was revived off-Broadway by the Irish Repertory Theatre, with Dana Ivey as Mrs. Warren, Laura O'Day as Vivie Warren, and David Stoller as Mr. Preed. The play was revived in 2010 in 3 separate venues. London's West End, at the Comedy Theatre, with Felicity Kendal in the title role. Washington, by the Shakespeare Theatre Company, at Sydney Harmon Hall, with Elizabeth Ashley in the title role. Broadway at the American Airlines Theatre under the auspices of the Roundabout Theatre Company, with Cherry Jones as Kitty Warren and Sally Hawkins as Vivie. It was performed by the Sydney Theatre Company in 2012, and was so popular that the season was extended. In 2016, the play was performed at the Centre Theatre in Seattle. In 2018, Eleanor Bishop's adaptation of the play was performed at the ASB Waterfront Theatre in Auckland, New Zealand by the Auckland Theatre Company. Sequel. Sir Harry Johnston wrote a sequel, a novel entitled Mrs. Warren's Daughter, circa 1920. Adaptations. 1960 German film adaptation, Mrs. Warren's Profession, starred Lily Palmer. BBC Television produced a television version first broadcast on 3 October 1972 on BBC Two under the Stage 2 drama Strand. Produced by Cedric Messina and directed by Herbert Wise, it starred Carl Brown in the title role, with Penelope Wilton as Vivie. Also in the cast were James Grout, Robert Powell, Richard Pearson, and Derek Godfrey. Under the Play of the Month Strand, the production was repeated on BB Cone on 21 April 1974. The production was released on DVD in 2006. A radio adaptation was broadcast on the BBC in 2002 and rebroadcast in January 2009 on BBC Radio 7, starring Maggie Steed in the title role. Armen Pandola's Mrs. Warren's profession transforms the story by bringing it into modern times. Mrs. Warren grows rich from her online porn and dating sites, while her sheltered daughter recoils from the knowledge that her privileged life is based on the exploitation of women. Vivie's character and the changing role of women. Men who could afford to get married in the Victorian era could make use of laws that gave him total control of his wife's person. Victorian women were expected to maintain a poised and dignified manner, and to obey their husbands. Vivi defies the Victorian expectations of an obedient woman. She is educated and entirely self-sufficient. She rejects two marriage proposals, reflecting her reliance on her work ethic and hard-headed approach to life. Shaw represents Vivi as the product of a type of gender reformation, a character who is asexual and permanently unromantic. Throughout the play, the boundary between sexual desires and proposed marriages is blurred. Frank flirts with both Mrs. Warren and Vivi. Mrs. Warren's companion Sir George Crofts proposes marriage to Vivi despite his relationship with her mother. Critic Petra Dirks-Thrun argues that these examples illustrate the way in which Shaw critiqued the ideological and economic system that produced her Mrs. Warren, attacking the problematic double standard of male privilege and the deeply entrenched objectification of women, which Shaw saw pervading all levels of Victorian society down to its most basic nuclear element, the family.